Hello, so in this part we will cover storytelling in podcasts. Storytelling involves weaving a narrative using sound, voice, and pacing. Unlike traditional storytelling in print or film, podcast storytelling relies heavily on audio. Storytelling is the core of podcasting because it keeps listeners emotionally invested. Podcasts like Serial are excellent cases of how storytelling drives engagement. Serial became a cultural phenomenon by narrating a real-life criminal investigation across episodes, building suspense through its structure. Core elements of a story: character development. In storytelling, characters serve as emotional and intellectual anchor of the narrative. In documentary-style podcasts, interview subjects, hosts, or even abstract ideas can take on a character-like role, embodying specific values, struggles, or questions. The three-dimensional character theory refers to creating character in stories, including podcasts, that are fully developed, complex, and relatable. This concept contrasts with one-dimensional flat or two-dimensional characters who lack depth and complexity. Three-dimensional characters have distinct personalities, desires, fears, and flaws, making them feel more like life and engaging for audience. In storytelling, particularly in podcasts, three-dimensional characters are essential for maintaining listener interest and driving the narrative forward. Key aspects of three-dimensional characters: outer dimension, appearance, and actions. This is what the audience sees or hears first about the character, their physical description, behaviors, and actions. In podcasts, it's often how the character is introduced to the listener through their voice, dialogue, or narration about their actions. While this outer dimension helps establish who the character is on the surface, it only scratches the surface of the complexity. Inner dimension, motivation and desires. The second dimension explores the character's internal motivation, what they want, fear, or desire. This dimension is about understanding why a character behaves in a particular way. Is a character driven by ambition, revenge, or a deep-seated need for validation? Understanding a character's inner dimension gives them more depth and helps the audience relate to their struggles and ambitions. Conflict, internal and external obstacles. The third dimension adds complexity through conflict, both internal, psychological, and external. Internal conflict involves moral dilemmas, insecurities, or unresolved emotions, while external conflicts could be situational, such as dealing with an antagonist or overcoming societal challenges. A well-rounded character often faces internal challenges that shape their reactions to external events. Plot refers to the sequence of events that make up a story. The basic plot structure typically follows a three-act framework. According to narrative theory, stories often follow a traditional narrative arc that includes a clear progression through stages. These stages are exposition, setting up the world and characters, raising action, events that increase tension, climax, the most intense or important turning point, fall in action, the fallout of consequences of the climax, resolution, the story's conclusion, often addressing the initial conflict. The arc applies to all formats of storytelling, whether it's a serialized drama or single episode true crime podcast. Joseph Campbell's hero's journey model, while often associated with the mythic storytelling, is also relevant in podcasting. In nonfiction, the plot may not follow a clear path, but successful podcast storytellers use narrative techniques to impose structure on real-world events. This may involve emphasizing specific turning points or decisions, creating a sense of causality and direction even in non-linear stories. Conflict theory in storytelling revolves around the idea that conflict is the driving force behind narrative progression. It's the opposition between characters, forces, or internal struggles that creates tension and motivates action. Without conflict, stories lack energy, direction, and the necessary friction to keep audiences engaged. Key types of conflict in storytelling: character vs self, internal conflict. This type of conflict involves a character struggling with their own emotions, beliefs, or desires. It's a psychological battle where the character must overcome their internal struggles, fear, guilt, doubt, or moral dilemmas. Example, in podcasts like The Bright Successions, characters deal with internal conflicts surrounding their mental health and abilities, creating tension as they navigate their personal growth. Character vs. character, interpersonal conflict. This is a direct conflict between two or more characters, usually involving opposing goals, desires, or values. It can be as simple as two characters competing. It could be as simple as two characters competing for the same objective, or as complex as a moral battle between protagonist and antagonist. Example, in true crime podcasts like Serial, interpersonal conflict arising as the host investigates the truth behind the case, often revealing conflicts between the accused and the justice system. Character vs. society, societal conflict. This type of conflict involves a character standing against societal norms, rules, or institutions. It can deal with broader themes like oppression, inequality, or rebellion against authority, where the protagonist feels at odds with the larger system or culture they live in. Example, in The Dream, a podcast exploring multi-level marketing companies. There's a societal conflict as individuals face off against the large corporate systems and the societal norms that support them. Character vs. nature, environmental conflict. This conflict occurs when the characters are up against the natural world or external forces beyond their control, disasters, animals, disease, or even time. Nature itself becomes the antagonist. Example, in narrative podcasts like Limetown, environmental conflicts arise when characters have to survive or escape uncontrolled circumstances. And character versus technological conflict. In modern storytelling, conflicts involving technology are becoming increasingly relevant. Characters may face challenges with artificial intelligence, machines, or the consequences of technology that has gone beyond human control. Example, in Blackout, a podcast where technology fails and society crumbles, characters grapple with the absence of modern conveniences, creating high-stakes conflict driven by technology loss. Narrative surprise is a storytelling technique used to create unexpected twists or revelations that challenge the audience assumptions or expectations. These surprises can shift the direction of the story, reveal hidden aspects of characters, or offer new information that changes the listener's understanding of the narrative. Key aspects of narrative surprise: unexpected twist. Yes, it should be, of course, sudden, often introduced at key moments to disrupt the narrative's expected flow. Twists keep listeners engaged by introducing new developments of information that reframe the audience perception of the story characters. Example, in Serial, the investigation seems to lean towards a particular conclusion, but with new evidence or perspectives, the direction of the case shifts, leaving listeners reconsidering what they thought they knew. Subverting expectations. This technique involves setting up expectations early in the narrative and then flipping those expectations later in the story. By deliberately leading listeners to anticipate one outcome, the storyteller can heighten the emotional impact of the surprise when those expectations are overturned. Example, in the podcast Homecoming, listeners are led to believe certain characters are allies, but as the story unfolds, their true motives are revealed, subverting the audience's initial assumptions. Reveal of hidden information. Narrative surprises often come in form of revelation. Pieces of critical information withheld from the audience or characters until a strategic moment. This information can change the audience's understanding of past events or alter the trajectory of the story. Example: in S-Town, the early part of the podcast sets up a murder mystery, but later episodes reveal deeper personal stories that shift the narrative's focus entirely. Pivots in character motivation. Characters are central to narrative surprise. When a character's true motivation or identity is revealed, it can create a powerful twist. These surprises help deepen characters' development and make them more complex, often challenging what the audience believed about them. Example: in West Corp, initial assumptions about key characters shift as more is revealed about their involvement in the crime, creating a complex web of motivation. Affective resonance refers to the emotional connection or response that a story, experience, or media content evokes in its audience. In storytelling, it describes how the emotions of characters or events in a narrative resonate with the listeners or viewers, creating a shared emotional experience. This emotional resonance helps deepen engagement, making the audience feel connected to the story on a more personal and visceral level. Key components of affective resonance. Emotional mirroring often involves the audience emotionally mirroring the feeling of the character or the tone of the narrative. When characters express fear, joy, or sadness, listeners are more likely to experience similar emotions, which strengthens their connection to the story. Shared emotional experience. Affective resonance works best when the story laps into universal emotions, feeling like love, fear, hope, or grief that many people have experienced. When a narrative explores these common human emotions, it's more likely to resonate deeply with a broad audience. Character empathy. When characters in a story are well developed and relatable, audiences are more likely to emphasize with them, leading to a stronger affective resonance. This emotional connection makes the audience care about the character's face, increasing their emotional investment in the narrative. Emotional story arc. Storytelling that carefully builds emotional arc where tension and emotion rise and fall can create moments of high emotional impact. These arcs resonate with listeners because they mimic the natural flow of the emotions in real life. Types of stories in podcast. Personal stories. These stories typically revolve around real-life events, emotions, or personal growth, offering listeners a window in the storyteller's life. Personal stories foster strong connection between the storyteller and the audience due to their relatability. Shows like The Moth of How I Built This highlight personal narratives where individuals recount meaningful, sometimes transformative experiences. Fictional stories are crafted narratives often used in narrative podcasts or audio dramas. These stories follow the conventions of fiction writing. In this podcast, sound design and voice acting play a crucial role in creating immersive worlds. Fictional podcasts like Welcome to Night Vale or The Truth offer a wide range of genres, from science fiction to thriller. Documentary storytelling. Storytelling in podcasts focus on real events, often involving investigative reporting or deep dives into specific topics like news, history, or true crime. These stories rely heavily on factual accuracy, interviews, and primary sources to build a narrative. True crime podcasts like Serial or Criminal are prime examples of documentary storytelling. Non-fiction storytelling doesn't just report events, it analyzes and interprets them. Creating engaging podcast stories, hooking the listener. The first 30 seconds of a podcast are crucial for capturing the listener's attention. This hook can be achieved through a gripping question, a surprising fact, or an emotional moment that instantly engages curiosity. For example, Serial begins with a hook that introduces the mystery of a murder, pulling listeners in immediately. By starting with an intriguing or provocative element, you set the tone and interest from the outset, ensuring that the listeners are invested in hearing more. Pacing, the speed at which a story unfolds. Its pacing affects how engaging the narrative feels. A well-paced story balances moments of fast action with slow, reflected passages. Too fast and the audience might miss key details. Too slow and they may lose interest. Effective pacing also includes strategic pauses, allowing listeners time to absorb information or build anticipation. For example, suspense podcasts like Lore uses slower pacing and pauses to heighten tension, creating a more immersive experience. Suspense and cliffhangers. Suspense keeps listeners on edge, eager to know what happens next. In serialized podcasts, cliffhangers are often used at the end of episodes to leave listeners wanting more, ensuring they tune in the next installment. Shows like Homecoming and Dirty John use this technique to build anticipation and maintain audience engagement across multiple episodes. By carefully revealing information and leaving key questions unanswered, podcast can sustain interest over time. Tone adaptation, a casual, controversial style works well for interview-based or personal podcasts, while a formal, neutral tone is more appropriate for documentary-style shows. For example, This American Life adapts its tone based on the topic, switching between light-hearted, humorous segments and serious, reflective storytelling. Tailoring the tone to the content helps ensure that the mood and the style of narration align with the story being told, enhancing listener engagement. Using music to build emotion. Of course, background music can significantly enhance the emotional tone of a story, guiding listeners through different moods and transitions. The right music sets the atmosphere, whether suspenseful, joyful, or reflective. It can reinforce key moments in the narrative. For example, Radiolab uses music to build emotional intensity, creating an immersive listening experience. However, the music should always complement, not overshadow the spoken word. Silence and pauses. Silence is a powerful but often overlooked storytelling tool. Used strategically, pauses can emphasize important moments, allow emotions to settle, or build suspense before a reveal. Silence creates space for reflection, allowing listeners to fully process what they've just heard. In shows like S-Town, silence is used effectively to mark transitions or convey the weight of emotional moments. In summary, storytelling is key to podcasting success. Understanding elements like character development, conflict, pacing, emotional impact will help you create engaging stories. Thank you for your attention and see you in the next part.